Skill Peninsula. And so we're going to be in 1 John chapter 4 today, starting off in verse 1. And John, throughout his book, he talks about love a lot. In fact, he talks about love more than any other New Testament epistle, New Testament letter to a church. But there's something else that John talks a lot about, and it's about false teaching. It's about those who sort of come into a community and begin speaking things that aren't true or divergent of the leadership or of proper doctrine. And so today John is going to be speaking to the people, the church, about how to identify a sort of a false teaching from a good teaching. And so we're going to read out of chapter 4, verse 1 today, starting off in verse 1. And this is how John starts. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know that the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come into the flesh and is from God, and every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard was coming, and now is in the world already. Little children, you are from God, and have overcome them. For he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. They are from the world. Therefore they speak from the world, and the world listens to them. We are from God. Whoever knows God listens to us. Whoever is not from God does not listen to us. By this we know that the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. Let's take a moment really quickly to look at sort of the incredible feat that the early church was under. Imagine for me for a moment that Jesus went up and he ascended into heaven, and then all of a sudden all these little missionaries began going to these little towns and preaching the gospel, and different people started following Jesus. But as these house churches were established throughout the Roman Empire, they didn't have a lot of tools in order to find themselves centered. Many of these house churches were just groups of families that gathered together. They didn't have a New Testament Bible like we have. They didn't have a pastor who was trained like we do. They didn't have a lot of they didn't even like creeds or like basic doctrines to be able to to circle themselves around. All they did was they heard the testimony of Jesus and they started believing in him, and then it was the spiritual Wild West. That's why it was so important for apostles like Paul and John to be constantly writing letters to these churches, because they began believing in weird and silly things, because where there are sheep, there will also be wolves. There ended up being individuals that began preying on these small groups of house churches. Many of them, I imagine, were probably well-intentioned, but they came with these ideas that were different than the truth that we have grown accustomed to today. And so John is writing to the church saying that there will be false prophets and false teachers that are amongst you, and this is the tools in how to identify if that you should listen to them or not. Paul found this a lot, the Apostle Paul. He even wrote in some of his letters, he said, I'm writing this in my own hand. He stamped it with a special pen, because supposedly there were individuals who were actually writing letters as Paul to these random churches about different things. And so Paul needed the people to know, hey, this is my hand that's writing this. It isn't some other guy that's just simply using my name. And so can you imagine for me for a moment, if we were to transport back in time, how confusing it must have been to be in the early church without a Bible, having heard the testimony of Jesus Christ, and then hearing these other people talk about Jesus, and you're like, I don't know if that's right or not. I heard, John say this other thing about that. Like, can you imagine how confusing that must be? And so this is why John spends time in talking to the church about false teachings and false prophecies. And as confusing as it must have been for them, I know that we are not so far removed from confusion, aren't we? Even though we have the Bible, even though we have more resources than ever to know what's right or what's wrong, still where there are sheep, there will also be wolves. And these wolves often dress in sheep's clothing, as Jesus gave us a picture of that in the Gospels. And so as the people of God, we need to be careful about the teachings and the different prophets and the different beliefs that we lend our ears to. Otherwise, we will find ourselves going astray. There's lots of beliefs being thrown around at us, whether they are cultural or whether they are political or whether they are theological in nature. There's lots of different beliefs, and we find ourselves sort of in the middle of a warpath of all these different views and perspectives. And quite frankly, I don't know about you, but I get really weary and tired because I don't know where it all fits together. I don't know who I should listen to. I don't know how much tolerance I should give here, how much grace I should give here, and quite frankly, I get exhausted trying to appease everyone and also find myself grounded all at the same time. Am I the only one? And so as important as it was for the early church to know who to listen to and who not to listen to, it's also, I believe, important for us because the arguments are more seductive than ever. The logic makes more sense now more than ever. The stories are more compelling now than ever. But where is the spirit of truth and where is the spirit of error? And so John writes for the church. He says there are two indicators that you can have in knowing the spirit of truth versus the spirit of error. And he outlined it for us, and we're going to look through it together today. The first one comes out of verses 1, 2, and 3. And so the first step is, how do you discern the difference between the spirit of truth and the spirit of error? Is what do they say about Jesus? John says, by this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses Jesus has come from the flesh from God, and every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. The spirit of the Antichrist, which you heard from, was coming and is now in the world already. John outlines us for today that the spirit of truth will be first affirming of Jesus' full divinity and his full humanity, and secondly, the spirit of truth will confess Jesus in their words and in their hearts of his lordship. Versus the spirit of error will do a half portion of each of these things. Rather than affirming Jesus' full divinity and full humanity, we call that the incarnation. The spirit of error will have some half-truthing of Jesus' divinity and his full humanity. Sometimes it'll be Jesus is all divine and he doesn't have any humanity when he came in the flesh. Some of it will be all humanity and no divinity, so he was more of a spirit than a person. Or there's some sort of skewed perspective of he's kind of 75-25, if you will. And the reason why this is important, the incarnation, when Jesus came and he was born as a baby in Bethlehem, he was born fully God, but he was also fully man. Why this is important is because anything less than full humanity and full divinity undercuts the cross. It undercuts the cross. And if there is no cross, there is no Christians. There is no power in grace. There is no forgiveness fully in his love. And anything that says that Jesus is not fully man or fully God is not fully Christian. It's not fully cross. The second thing, the spirit of truth, it says the spirit of truth won't just affirm Jesus' full divinity and his full humanity, but the spirit of truth will also confess Jesus in their words and in their hearts of his lordship. See, the spirit of error will stop short of Jesus' lordship over their lives. Maybe they may affirm, yes, I believe that Jesus was fully divine and fully human, but they'll stop short of crowning him as Lord over their hearts and Lord over their mouths. They will speak to Jesus' brilliance, but they won't surrender to his call. They will revere his teaching as moral, but they won't be transformed by it. They can quote a verse, but they're not representative of cross. See, the problem with affirming Jesus in his divinity and his humanity, but not making him Lord over their lives, is ultimately, at that point, Jesus is then used as a leverage piece. And I'm sure that you have seen this many times. Because if Jesus isn't Lord over the life of the person speaking the name of Jesus in the gospel of truth, usually their own selfish intentions are mixed in the middle. We are a church that happens to have a lot of de-churched individuals in this place. We have people who have come out of church environments that some were abusive and some were confusing. And because of that, it took you a long time in order to trust this book and trust Jesus and trust your pastor. And it's common in the stories of each one of these individuals and the context that they came out of is that there was someone in authority that ultimately didn't have Jesus as the lordship over their life. And so they were leveraging Jesus' teaching and his name as something to compel someone rather than to just simply offer the good message. And so John writes to the church, and he says, if the Spirit of truth will always be affirming of Jesus' incarnation and will always have someone speaking that has confessed Jesus as lordship over their life. There have been many times as a pastor I've sort of encountered sort of this spirit of error. I remember when we first started off here at Sacred Church, there was someone who came and it was within the first couple of months that we were opened. And, I opened, and I was at the time I did our own banking, and so I opened up and I did all the banking stuff. And someone gave our biggest check that we had ever received up to that point, and I was like, "Whoa, this is crazy!" And then this person emailed me and said, "Hey, I'd love to meet with you." I'm like, "Absolutely. I will take a coffee date with you anytime." And so we go and we sit down and we begin talking. And as this person is talking, I'm just getting this sort of funny sensation in my spirit. And I feel like this person isn't exactly grounded. It's as if they were talking about the name of Jesus, but they weren't talking about the Jesus that I knew. And before long, after a couple of questions, I figured out, oh, this person didn't believe in Jesus' humanity. They didn't fully believe in the incarnation, which was astounding to me. I thought that was a given. I thought that people just believe in this stuff, but no, not this person. And so it was hard for me to say goodbye to this person, and things didn't exactly work out. But it was weird to be able to sit down and have this conversation, and this person was trying to be manipulative and try to like challenge the doctrine of the church. And I was like, seems like it's a spirit of error, not just a spirit of truth. Just yesterday, I was talking to one of our Sacred Churchers, and he called me on the phone, and he said, "Hey, someone said I shouldn't be praying in Jesus' name," and they were they were crying on the phone, like, "I love Jesus. How can I not pray in Jesus' name?" Still to this day, there are people who are being challenged with the spirit of error that are trying to knock our people off base. The spirit of error will not recognize his Jesus' incarnation, and they will certainly not make them lordship over their life. And the reason why this is important is this, is that the spirit of truth brings Christ to the center. A spirit of error crowds Christ with compromise and chaos. To put it simply, the spirit of truth brings Christ to the center. An easy indicator is this teaching, is this person trying to bring Jesus to the middle of the conversation? Or are they trying to muffle Jesus' gospel, muffle his teaching, muffle who he is with all this extra chaos and stuff and compromises and different different things? Like does that make sense? Oftentimes when I see a spirit of error, I see almost like a crowded room of conversation. There's so many caveats and there's so many other things in the center of the room, and it makes me just want to do some spring cleaning. Okay, what do you say about Jesus? What do you say about Jesus? There have been many times I've sat down and I've talked with friends of different faiths and different religions, and we found some different common grounds and different aspects, but ultimately it comes back to Jesus. It always comes back to Jesus. What do you say about Jesus? And the reason why Jesus is so important is because without Jesus, there is no cross. And that is the bedrock foundation of our teaching and of our hope and of our assurance. It always comes back to Jesus. The second tool that John gives us, he doesn't say, he first off, he says, what do they say about Jesus? And then he goes and he says, what does the world think of them? John writes, little children, you are from God and you have overcome them. And he that is in you is greater than he is who is in the world. What a great promise there. What a great promise. Because right there, John sort of outlines where the authority is that we speak from. See, as children of God, we are now heirs. We are now co-heirs of Christ. We are co-heirs of God. And so when we speak not from the world standpoint, but we are interlocked or grounded with him. And so he says, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. They are from this world, therefore they speak from this world, and the world listens to them. We are from God. Whoever knows God listens to us, and whoever is not from God does not listen to us. By this we know the spirit of truth and of the spirit of error. And so John not only says, what do they say about Jesus, but what is the world saying about them as well? Some quick tips about this. If it hasn't been seen in 2,000 years, it probably isn't legit. It's funny studying church history, and and some people try to have a cool slant on the gospel or something like that. And before long, they're drinking juice, and they find themselves passed out in a prairie somewhere. And bad doctrine hurts people, right? Cults hurt people. And if there's a new take on something, that's been said, if it hasn't been done in 2,000 years, it probably isn't legit. If it hasn't been done in 2,000 years, it's probably not legit. But if it's been celebrated too much, it probably isn't legit either. Because once again, the world does not understand the truth, and so if it's celebrated too much, around the globosphere, I question whether it is legit or not. And lastly, if it's spoken from logic and not from authority, it's probably not legit as well. The people of the gospel, when they heard Jesus' teachings, Jesus spoke, and the people said, he speaks with authority, but not like the Pharisees do. And so there is a certain authority that is spoken, not just not a bravado, but an authority that is spoken with truth, that the Spirit of truth has. And the reason why this is important is that the Spirit of truth brings clarity and confusion and contentment and pushback. The Spirit of truth brings clarity and confusion and contentment and pushback. There's going to be times in our walk and in this church when the Spirit of truth is going to direct us in a certain way, and is going to remind us of the gospel, and within that there is going to be some pushback, but the Spirit of God and the Spirit of truth gives us contentment to be able to take it. There's going to be times in which the Spirit of truth is going to find itself at odds with the spirit of error, and there's going to be confusion about what about this, what about that. There's going to be chaos, but the Spirit of truth brings clarity and a clear path. It gives the right steps to take so that we will not fall ourselves in error. And so John is writing to this early church that is certainly confused, and they found themselves victims of bad teachings and false narratives. And he says, this is how you tell the Spirit of truth versus the spirit of error. And so today, my prayer for you is that we would be able to have that Spirit of truth. But do you know what I'm kind of scared about even preaching this? Is that I don't want us to become a church of cynics. I don't want us to become a church of, evaluating, every statement or every individual, with a magnifying glass and be like, spirit of error, spirit of... Because John is writing not about just a simple person who is an unbeliever that walks into the church and has believed certain things all their life because that's all they've ever known. John is specifically writing about individuals and people who shake the boat, who are sort of like the queen bees of thought and philosophy and bad theology, people who are purposely trying to steer people away from the shepherd. And so I don't believe we have any of these individuals within this room, but we need to be aware that the spirit of error exists. And so I don't want us to be a church of cynics. And so my prayer for you, and my prayer for me today is, Lord, give me a discerning spirit without becoming cynical. Give me a discerning spirit about what to believe and what to see and what to say when the news is bombarding me and I'm getting all these feelings and thoughts and ideas and what to believe and what not to believe. Give me a discerning spirit without becoming cynical. Because I don't want to go through this life thinking that the devil's under every rock. Because at the end of the day, greater is he that is in you and me than he that is in the world. We've already had the victory. We've already won. But in the meantime, let's have a discerning spirit so that we won't allow the spirit of error to hurt people. I don't want you to be hurt. We've had too many Christians be hurt by bad beliefs. And I believe that God has given us the tools and the spirit to be able to know those things.